Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we begin today's attack report, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel. Your support is very important to us, so please subscribe. Go ahead and leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from, and click the like button. All of this because... It was just past 9 p.m. when my world turned upside down. I'd been driving for hours, heading back to the city after a grueling business trip in the rural outskirts of Montana. The roads were empty, winding through dense forests and rolling hills. I was tired, but the thought of my warm bed kept me going. Then it happened. My reliable old sedan, which had never given me trouble before, started to sputter and cough. No, I muttered, gripping the steering wheel tighter. The engine made a sickening noise and the car began to slow. My heart sank as I realized what was happening. "Come on, just a little further," I pleaded, but it was no use. The car rolled to a stop on the side of the desolate country road, leaving me stranded in the middle of nowhere. I sat there for a moment trying to process the situation. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the ticking of the cooling engine. I reached for my phone, praying for a signal. Nothing. Not even a single bar. "Shit," I hissed, tossing it onto the passenger seat in frustration. The reality of my situation began to sink in. I was alone, in the dark, with no way to call for help. Sighing heavily, I stepped out of the car. The cool night air hit me, and I shivered, wishing I'd brought a heavier jacket. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. It would have been beautiful if I wasn't so damn scared. I popped the hood and stared at the engine, realizing I had no idea what I was looking for. Cars were never my strong suit. "Maybe it's just overheated," I said to myself, trying to stay calm. "I'll let it cool down and try again in a bit." That's when I heard it. A sound that made my blood run cold. A howl, distant but clear, echoing through the night. It wasn't like any wolf howl I'd heard before. This was deeper, more guttural, almost unnatural. "It's just a wolf," I whispered, trying to convince myself. "Nothing to worry about. They don't attack humans, right?" But deep down, I knew this was different. Something about that sound set off every alarm in my body. I turned back to the engine, determined to figure out the problem. Sweat beaded on my forehead as I fumbled with the hood latch, my hands shaking slightly. The moonlight wasn't enough to see clearly, so I pulled out my phone to use as a flashlight. As I leaned in, squinting at the mysterious components, another howl pierced the night. Closer this time. Much closer. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The sound seemed to come from just beyond the tree line, maybe 100 yards away. "Okay, time to get back in the car," I said, my voice trembling. I slammed the hood shut and rushed to the driver's side door. That's when I heard it. A sharp crack like a twig snapping underfoot coming from the woods to my right. I whirled around, peering into the darkness. The trees loomed ominously, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. Another snap, followed by the rustle of leaves. Something was moving in there. Something big. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting it. My voice sounded small and scared in the vast darkness. "Is anyone there?" No response, just more rustling, getting closer. I fumbled with the car door, my hands slick with sweat. Come on," I muttered, finally managing to yank it open. I practically dove inside, slamming the door shut and hitting the lock button repeatedly. Safe inside the car, I tried to calm my racing heart. "It's probably just a deer," I said, but I didn't believe it. The woods had gone silent again, but the silence was somehow worse. It felt like the whole forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I turned the key in the ignition, praying for the engine to roar to life. Nothing. Not even a sputter. "No, please," I begged, trying again and again. The battery wasn't dead, the lights still worked, but the engine refused to start. Another howl split the night, so close it made me jump in my seat. This time there was no mistaking it. This was no ordinary wolf. The sound was too deep, too powerful, almost like it was coming from something much larger. I sat there, paralyzed with fear, staring out into the darkness. The trees seemed to close in around me, and every shadow looked like it might be hiding some monstrous shape. I kept telling myself it was just my imagination running wild, but deep down, I knew something was out there, something that shouldn't exist. As the minutes ticked by, the forest remained eerily quiet. No more howls, no more snapping twigs. But somehow that was worse. It felt like whatever was out there was watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. I checked my phone again. Still no signal. I was completely cut off from the world, trapped in this metal box with something prowling just beyond the reach of my headlights. Think, damn it, I muttered to myself. What are your options? I could try to flag down a passing car, but the road had been empty for hours. I could attempt to walk to the nearest town, but I had no idea how far that might be, and the thought of being out there exposed made my skin crawl. So I waited, every muscle tense, ready to... What? What could I possibly do if that thing decided to attack? I had no weapons, no way to defend myself. All I could do was sit there and hope that whatever was out there would lose interest and move on. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky, I felt a glimmer of hope. Surely, in the light of day, things would seem less terrifying. Maybe I'd be able to figure out what was wrong with the car, or at least have a better chance of flagging down help. But as I sat there, watching the shadows slowly recede, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Whatever was out there, whatever had made those inhuman sounds, it was still close by. And somehow I knew that when night fell again, it would be back. Little did I know, as I sat there waiting for the sun to fully rise, that my ordeal was far from over. As night fell once again, my fear intensified. The brief respite of daylight had done little to calm my nerves. I'd spent hours trying to flag down passing cars, but this road was as deserted as it had been the night before. Now, as darkness crept in, I found myself right back where I started, trapped in a dead car on a lonely stretch of road. The clouds that had been gathering all afternoon began to part, revealing the full moon. Its silvery light spilled across the landscape, casting long, twisted shadows. The trees looked like gnarled, reaching fingers, and every rustle of leaves made me flinch. "It's just the wind," I whispered to myself, trying to keep calm. But deep down, I knew better. The air was still, oppressively so. Whatever was moving out there, it wasn't the wind. I kept my eyes fixed on the tree line, scanning back and forth. The moonlight played tricks on my vision, turning harmless shapes into menacing silhouettes. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. That's when I saw them. A pair of eyes, glowing an unnatural yellow-green in the darkness. They were fixed on me, unblinking and predatory. My blood ran cold, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. "No," I gasped. "This can't be happening." But it was. Those eyes were real, and they were moving closer. Panic seized me. I scrambled to get back inside the car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grasp the door handle. I practically fell into the driver's seat, slamming the door behind me. The sound echoed in the quiet night, seeming impossibly loud. My fingers fumbled with the lock, pressing it over and over as if that would somehow make the car more secure. "Please," I whimpered. "Please, just go away." But it didn't go away. Instead, it emerged from the tree line, and I got my first clear look at the creature. It was massive, easily the size of a bear, but its form was unmistakably wolf-like. Its fur was matted and dark, its muscles rippling beneath as it moved. And those eyes, they gleamed with an intelligence that was terrifyingly unanimal. "This isn't real," I told myself, even as I watched the monster approach. "Werewolves don't exist. This is just a really big wolf, or a bear, something normal." But there was nothing normal about this beast. It moved with a fluid grace that belied its size, each step deliberate and predatory. Its snout was pulled back in a snarl, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth that glinted in the moonlight. I held my breath, afraid that even the slightest movement might provoke an attack. The creature circled the car slowly, its eyes never leaving me. I could see my own terrified reflection in the windshield, ghostly pale and wide-eyed. As it came around to the driver's side, I got a closer look at its face. There was something almost human in its features, a twisted parody of a wolf's snout that made my skin crawl. Its breath fogged the window, and I recoiled, pressing myself against the passenger door. "Go away," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Please, just go away." But it didn't. Instead, it reared up on its hind legs, towering over the car. Its front paws, hands, came down on the hood with a thunderous crash. The whole vehicle shook, and I let out an involuntary scream. The beast's head snapped towards the sound, its ears perking up. It let out a low, rumbling growl that I felt more than heard, vibrating through the metal of the car and into my bones. I fumbled for my phone, desperate for some connection to the outside world, but the screen remained stubbornly blank. No signal. No help coming. The creature started to circle again, this time dragging its claws along the side of the car. The screech of metal on metal was unbearable, and I clapped my hands over my ears, squeezing my eyes shut. "This isn't happening," I repeated to myself, rocking back and forth in my seat. "This isn't real. I'm going to wake up any second now." But when I opened my eyes, the nightmare was still there. The werewolf, because what else could I call it, had moved to the back of the car. I watched in the rearview mirror as it lowered its massive head, sniffing at the trunk. Then, with a speed that seemed impossible for something so large, it whirled and slammed into the back of the car. The impact sent me lurching forward, my head nearly hitting the steering wheel. I scrambled to right myself, panic making my movements clumsy. The beast was at my window now, so close I could see the saliva dripping from its jaws. It raised one massive paw, tipped with claws as long as my fingers, and dragged it down the glass. The sound was like nails on a chalkboard, high-pitched and grating. But worse was the realization that the window wouldn't hold. A few more swipes like that, and it would shatter. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit here and wait to be torn apart. With shaking hands, I reached for the key in the ignition. Maybe, just maybe, the engine would start this time. I turned the key, and for a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, miracle of miracles, the engine sputtered to life. The sudden noise startled the creature, and it backed away from the car, ears flattened against its head. Not wasting a second, I threw the car into drive and slammed my foot on the accelerator. The tires spun in the loose gravel before finding purchase, and then we were moving, lurching forward down the dark road. In the rearview mirror, I saw the werewolf give chase for a few bounds before falling behind. Its howl of frustration echoed through the night, sending shivers down my spine. I didn't slow down, I didn't look back. I just drove, hands clenched on the wheel, heart pounding in my chest. The trees flew by in a dark blur, and I prayed I wouldn't hit a curve too fast and end up back in those woods. As the miles stretched on and the howls faded into the distance, I began to relax just a fraction. But I knew this wasn't over. Whatever that thing was, wherever it had come from, I had a sickening feeling that our encounter wasn't finished. The night was still young, and the full moon hung heavy in the sky. Somewhere out there, that creature was still hunting. The momentary relief I felt as I sped away from that monster was short-lived. My old sedan, which had miraculously started when I needed it most, began to sputter and cough again after just a few miles. The engine died with a final pathetic wheeze, leaving me stranded once more on this godforsaken road. "No, no, no," I cried, pounding the steering wheel in frustration. I coasted to a stop on the shoulder, surrounded by the same dense, dark forest. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by my ragged breathing and the ticking of the cooling engine. I sat there, paralyzed with fear, straining my ears for any sound of pursuit. For a few blessed moments there was nothing. Then a distant howl pierced the night, sending icy tendrils of dread crawling up my spine. It was coming. That thing, that impossible creature, was coming for me. I tried the engine again, but it was no use. Whatever had temporarily brought it back to life was gone now. I was trapped, a sitting duck waiting for the predator to find me. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig in the surrounding woods made me flinch. My eyes darted frantically from mirror to mirror, searching the darkness for any sign of movement. Then I saw it. A flash of yellow-green eyes in the rearview mirror, there and gone in an instant. My heart leapt into my throat. "Please," I whispered to no one in particular. "Please, let this be a nightmare. Let me wake up." But I knew I wouldn't wake up. This was real, as impossible as it seemed. The first scrape of claws against metal nearly made me jump out of my skin. The sound came from behind, a slow, deliberate dragging noise that set my teeth on edge. I whirled around in my seat just in time to see a massive, furry form slink past the rear window. It was circling the car, testing for weaknesses. I could hear its heavy breathing, punctuated by low, rumbling growls that seemed to vibrate through the very frame of the vehicle. Panic seized me. I scrambled into the back seat, putting as much distance between myself and the windows as I could. I curled up, making myself as small as possible, and prayed that the locks would hold. "Go away," I pleaded in a trembling whisper. "Please, just go away." But it didn't go away. Instead, it paused by the rear passenger window. I could feel its presence, an almost palpable weight of malevolence pressing against the thin barrier of glass and metal. Slowly, terrified of what I might see, I raised my eyes to the window. The creature's face was there, inches away, its hot breath fogging the glass. Those unnatural eyes bored into me, filled with a hunger that was all too human. I bit back a scream, pressing myself against the opposite door. The beast's lips curled back in a snarl, revealing rows of gleaming teeth. It was studying me, I realized with growing horror. This wasn't just an animal acting on instinct. There was an intelligence behind those eyes, a calculated cruelty that chilled me to my core. For a long moment we stared at each other, predator and prey separated by a fragile sheet of glass. Then, with a speed that belied its massive size, it lunged at the side mirror. The crack of breaking plastic and the screech of tearing metal filled the air as the mirror was ripped clean off. I couldn't hold back my scream this time, the sound tearing from my throat in a primal expression of terror. The creature's head snapped towards me, its ears perking up at my cry. It let out a bone-chilling howl, so loud it seemed to shake the very air around us. Then, with deliberate slowness, it moved to the driver's side door. I watched, paralyzed with fear, as it reared up on its hind legs. It towered over the car, its form a nightmarish silhouette against the moonlit sky. For a split second, everything was still. Then it slammed its body against the door with earth-shattering force. The entire car rocked with the impact. Metal groaned and buckled, and I heard the ominous sound of cracking glass. I screamed again, unable to stop myself, my voice hoarse with terror. "Help!" I cried out, knowing it was futile. "Somebody, please help me." But there was no one to hear my pleas. No one except the monster outside, which seemed spurred on by my cries. It slammed into the door again and again, each impact more ferocious than the last. I could see the door beginning to cave inward, the window spider-webbing with cracks. It was only a matter of time before it gave way completely. Desperate, I lunged for the glove compartment, praying I'd find something, anything I could use as a weapon. My trembling hands found nothing but old receipts and a flashlight with dead batteries. The creature paused in its assault, and for a moment I dared to hope it had given up. But then I heard it padding around to the other side of the car. It was testing each door, looking for the weakest point. I was trapped in a metal coffin, and my executioner was circling outside. As if sensing my thoughts, the beast let out another howl. The sound reverberated through the car, seeming to come from all directions at once. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it did little to muffle the terrifying noise. When the howl faded, the night fell eerily silent. I held my breath, straining to hear where the creature had gone. The suspense was almost worse than the attack. Then, with a resounding crash, It slammed into the rear of the car. The back window shattered, raining glass into the back seat. I felt stinging cuts on my arms and face as I instinctively tried to shield myself. The beast's massive head thrust through the broken window, snapping and snarling as it tried to force its way inside. Its hot, rancid breath filled the car, and I gagged at the smell of blood and decay. I scrambled forward, clawing my way into the front seat. My hand found the key in the ignition, and I turned it with desperate hope. To my utter amazement, the engine roared to life. Not questioning this miracle, I slammed the car into drive and floored the accelerator. The tires screeched against the asphalt as we lurched forward, leaving the monster behind. In the rearview mirror, I saw the creature bound after us for a few strides before falling back. Its furious howl followed me down the dark road, a promise that this night of terror was far from over. As I sped away, my whole body shaking with adrenaline and fear, I knew that I couldn't keep running forever. Sooner or later, I would have to face this nightmare head-on. But for now, all I could do was drive, putting as much distance as possible between myself and that impossible, terrifying beast. The night stretched on, dark and full of dangers, and I had no idea what horrors still lay ahead. The momentary relief I felt as I sped away quickly evaporated. My car, pushed beyond its limits, began to sputter and slow once again. The engine died with a final, pathetic wheeze, leaving me stranded in the middle of the road. No, 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 I cried, slamming my palms against the steering wheel. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by my ragged breathing and the distant, haunting howl that sent shivers down my spine. It was coming. That monstrous thing was coming for me again. With trembling hands, I began to search the car frantically for anything I could use as a weapon. The glove compartment yielded nothing but old papers and a dead flashlight. I reached under the seats, my fingers brushing against empty fast food wrappers and loose change. Come on. There has to be something, I muttered, my voice shaking with desperation. As I searched, I heard it, the sound of heavy footfalls approaching. My heart leaped into my throat. I abandoned my search and huddled in the driver's seat, eyes darting between the mirrors trying to catch a glimpse of the creature. Suddenly the car rocked violently. I was thrown against the door, my head slamming into the window. Stars exploded in my vision as I struggled to regain my bearings. The beast was trying to flip the car. Another violent shake sent me tumbling into the passenger seat. I could hear the metal groaning under the assault, the windows rattling in their frames. How long before they gave way? In a moment of clarity, I remembered the trunk. There had to be something useful there. I scrambled into the back seat, keeping low to avoid being thrown around as the car continued to rock. I pulled the lever to lower the rear seats, creating an opening to the trunk. As I reached in, my hand closed around something cold and metallic. The tire iron. I pulled it out, clutching it tightly. It felt pitifully small in my hands, barely more than a glorified crowbar. What chance did I have against that monster with this? But it was something. It was hope. The assault on the car intensified. I could hear claws scraping against metal, teeth gnashing at the tires. The whole world seemed to tilt as the creature redoubled its efforts to overturn the vehicle. I braced myself against the seats, tire iron held tightly to my chest. "Come on," I whispered, a mantra of desperation. "Come on, you can do this. You have to do this." A deafening crash filled the air as the rear window exploded inward. Glass rained down on me, cutting my exposed skin. Before I could react, a massive clawed hand thrust through the opening. Time seemed to slow down. I saw every detail with horrifying clarity. The matted dark fur, the wickedly curved claws, each easily as long as my fingers. The stench of wet dog and something far more foul filled the car. Acting on pure instinct, I lashed out with the tire iron. It connected with something solid, eliciting a howl of pain and rage from the creature. The hand withdrew, but I knew it was only a temporary reprieve. "Get away," I screamed, my voice hoarse with terror. "Leave me alone." But the beast wasn't deterred. If anything, my resistance seemed to enrage it further. It slammed into the side of the car again, the impact so strong I feared the vehicle would roll. I scrambled to the other side, trying to put as much distance between myself and the shattered window as possible. The tire iron was slick in my sweaty grip, but I held on for dear life. It was my only defense against the nightmare outside. The creature's face appeared at the broken window, its yellow eyes gleaming with malevolent intelligence. Its snout was pulled back in a snarl, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. This close, I could see the saliva dripping from its jaws, could smell its fetid breath. It was more than a wolf, more than any animal I'd ever seen. There was something almost human in its eyes, a twisted, cruel intelligence that chilled me to my core. As it began to force its way through the window, I knew I had to act. Gripping the tire iron with both hands, I swung with all my might. The metal connected with the side of its head with a sickening thud. The beast reeled back, momentarily stunned, but my victory was short-lived. With a roar that shook the very air, it renewed its assault on the car. Claws raked across the roof, peeling back the metal like it was tin foil. The sound was unbearable, a shrieking cacophony that set my teeth on edge. I covered my ears with one hand, still clutching the tire iron with the other. "Please," I whimpered, though I didn't know who I was pleading with. "Please, make it stop." But there was no divine intervention coming. No last-minute rescue. It was just me, this flimsy piece of metal, and the monster that seemed determined to tear me apart. The roof began to buckle inward under the creature's weight. I could see tufts of its fur through the widening gaps, could hear its heavy breathing and low, rumbling growls. In that moment, I knew I had a choice to make. I could stay here, trapped in this metal coffin, waiting for the inevitable. Or I could take a chance, slim as it was. With shaking hands, I reached for the door handle. The creature was focused on the roof, still trying to pry it open. Maybe, just maybe, I could slip out and make a run for it. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to do. The tire iron was clutched tightly in my right hand, my left poised on the door handle. "One," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sounds of tearing metal. "Two." Before I could say three, the beast's claws punched through the roof, mere inches from my head. I screamed, all thoughts of a countdown forgotten, and threw myself at the door. It burst open and I tumbled out onto the hard asphalt. Pain shot through my body, but adrenaline pushed me to my feet. I started running, not daring to look back. Behind me, I heard the creature's roar of fury. The sound of claws on pavement told me it was in pursuit. As I ran into the dark forest, my lungs burning and my legs trembling, I knew the night was far from over. The beast was still out there, still hunting me, and I was running out of options. The trees loomed ahead, dark and forbidding. But they were my only hope now. As I plunged into their shadows, the creature's howl echoed through the night, a promise that this nightmare was far from over. The forest around me was a blur of shadows and moonlight as I ran, my feet pounding against the uneven ground. My lungs burned and my legs felt like lead, but fear kept me moving. The sounds of pursuit that had been so close behind me gradually faded, replaced by the eerie silence of the woods at night. Finally, when I could run no more, I collapsed against a large oak tree, sliding down to sit at its base. My chest heaved as I gasped for air, each breath painful in my raw throat. For a moment, all I could hear was the thundering of my own heartbeat in my ears. As my breathing slowly steadied, I realized something. The werewolf was gone. The forest around me was quiet, too quiet. No rustling of leaves, no snapping of twigs under massive paws, just silence. "Is it over?" I whispered to myself, hardly daring to believe it. I stayed there, pressed against the tree for what felt like an eternity. My eyes darted around wildly, searching the darkness between the trees for any sign of movement, any hint of those glowing yellow eyes. But there was nothing. Slowly, cautiously, I pushed myself to my feet. My whole body ached, and I could feel warm trickles of blood from where the broken glass had cut me earlier. But I was alive. Somehow, impossibly, I was still alive. "Hello?" I called out softly, immediately regretting it. What if the creature was still out there, just waiting for me to give away my position? I held my breath, listening intently. The forest remained silent. No response, no growl, no sound of approaching danger. Just the gentle rustle of leaves in the night breeze. Minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an hour. Every muscle in my body was tense, ready to spring into action at the slightest provocation. But nothing came. As the adrenaline began to wear off, the reality of my situation started to sink in. I was lost in the woods in the middle of the night with no idea which direction would lead me back to civilization. And somewhere out there, that monster was still lurking. Think, I muttered to myself. You need to find your way out of here. I tried to retrace my path in my mind, but it was useless. In my panic, I had run blindly, taking random turns without any thought of where I was going. For all I knew, I had been running in circles. A twig snapped somewhere in the distance, and I flinched, pressing myself back against the tree. My heart, which had just begun to slow, started racing again. It's nothing, I whispered, trying to convince myself. Probably just a deer or something. But what if it wasn't? What if the werewolf was out there, stalking me, waiting for the perfect moment to strike? I don't know how long I stood there, barely breathing, straining my ears for any sound of approach. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the dark, silent forest. Then, just as I was starting to relax a fraction, a howl split the night air. I jumped, a small cry escaping my lips before I could stifle it. But as I listened, I realized something. The howl was distant, and it seemed to be moving further away. Was the creature leaving? Had it given up the chase? I didn't dare to hope, but as the minutes ticked by and no further sounds came, a tiny spark of optimism began to grow in my chest. Okay, I said to myself, my voice barely above a whisper. Okay, you can do this. You just need to stay calm and find your way out of here. I looked up, trying to orient myself using the stars, but the dense canopy above blocked most of the sky from view. The full moon, which had been so bright earlier, was now hidden behind a bank of clouds. With no other option, I picked a direction at random and started walking. Every step was careful, deliberate. I winced at each crunch of leaves under my feet, sure that the sound would bring the monster running back. But nothing happened. The forest remained quiet, almost peaceful. If it weren't for the cut stinging my skin and the lingering smell of the werewolf's foul breath on my clothes, I might have convinced myself that the whole thing had been a terrible nightmare. As I walked, I kept my eyes peeled for any sign of a road or trail, anything that might lead me back to civilization. But there was nothing. Just endless trees and underbrush, all looking the same in the dim moonlight. I don't know how long I wandered. It could have been hours or maybe just minutes. Time seemed to stretch and warp, each moment bleeding into the next. Another howl echoed through the night, making me freeze in my tracks. But like before, it sounded distant. Was it my imagination, or did it seem even further away this time? Please, I whispered, though I wasn't sure who or what I was pleading with. Please, just let me make it out of here. As if in answer to my prayer, I noticed a change in the quality of light around me. The oppressive darkness of the forest was beginning to lift, ever so slightly. I looked up, and through a gap in the trees, I could see the sky beginning to lighten. The full moon, which had been the backdrop to this night of terror, was fading as the first hints of dawn crept across the horizon. A wave of relief washed over me so strong it nearly brought me to my knees. I had survived the night. Whatever that creature was, wherever it had gone, I had made it through to morning. Oh, thank God, I breathed, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes. As the sky continued to lighten, I felt a renewed surge of energy. The shadows that had seemed so menacing were retreating, revealing the forest for what it was. Just trees and bushes, not the stuff of nightmares. With the growing light came hope. I would find my way out of here. I would get back to civilization, to safety, and then, well, I wasn't sure what I would do then. Who would believe my story? Who could I tell about the impossible creature I had encountered? But those were problems for later. For now, I just had to focus on getting out of this forest. As I continued to walk, the sky grew brighter. Birds began to chirp, greeting the new day. The normal sounds of the forest returning were like music to my ears after the unnatural silence of the night. Yet even as hope grew with the dawning day, a part of me remained on edge. The memory of those yellow eyes, that massive fur-covered form, was seared into my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The werewolf was gone for now, driven away by the coming of day. But somewhere out there, it was still waiting. And as long as it existed, as long as it roamed these woods, I knew I would never truly feel safe again. With that chilling thought, I pressed on, determined to find my way back to the world I knew. The world where monsters like that didn't exist, or at least where I could pretend they didn't. As the first rays of sunlight pierced through the trees, I finally stumbled out of the forest and onto the road where my ordeal had begun. My car sat there, a silent testament to the night's horrors. For a moment I just stood there, my mind struggling to reconcile the peaceful morning with the terror I'd just lived through. Cautiously I approached the vehicle. Each step felt like it took an eternity, my body aching from the night's exertions. As I drew closer, the extent of the damage became apparent and my breath caught in my throat. "Oh my God," I whispered, my voice hoarse and barely audible. The car was a wreck. The roof was caved in, the metal twisted and torn as if it had been attacked by a giant can opener. The rear window was completely shattered, glass littering the back seat and the ground around the car. The side mirror hung limply, dangling by a few wires. My hands trembled as I reached out to touch the hood. Deep gouges marred the metal, unmistakably claw marks. I traced them with my fingers, feeling the sharp edges where the paint had been scraped away. "This is real," I murmured to myself. "This really happened." Part of me had been clinging to the hope that it had all been some sort of vivid hallucination or nightmare. But the evidence was right here in front of me, impossible to deny. As I circled the car, surveying the damage, something on the ground caught my eye. A dark pool of liquid had collected near the rear tire. At first I thought it might be oil from the damaged engine, but as I knelt down to inspect it closer, my stomach churned. The liquid was thick and dark red. Blood. I recoiled, stumbling back a few steps. Had I wounded the creature when I struck it with the tire iron? Or was this my blood? I looked down at myself, suddenly aware of the cuts and bruises that covered my body. My clothes were torn and stained, and I could feel dried blood on my face and arms. The sound of an approaching vehicle snapped me out of my daze. A pickup truck was coming down the road, the first sign of human life I'd seen since this nightmare began. Without thinking, I ran out into the middle of the road, waving my arms frantically. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Stop! Please, I need help!" The truck slowed to a stop, and a middle-aged man with a weathered face leaned out the window. His eyes widened as he took in my disheveled appearance and the wrecked car behind me. "Jesus, son," he said, "what the hell happened to you?" I opened my mouth to explain, but where could I even begin? How could I possibly make him understand what I'd been through? I stammered, my voice shaking. "Last night my car broke down and then there was this thing, this creature. It attacked me. It tried to kill me." The man's expression shifted from concern to skepticism. "A creature?" he repeated. "What kind of creature?" I hesitated. Even to my own ears, the truth sounded insane. It was like a wolf, but huge, bigger than a bear, and it walked on two legs sometimes. It was a werewolf. As soon as the words left my mouth, I knew how it sounded. The man's face confirmed it. He didn't believe a word. "Right," he said slowly, his tone making it clear he thought I was either crazy or lying. "Look, kid, have you been drinking? Or maybe took something you shouldn't have?" "No," I protested. "I swear I'm telling the truth. Look at my car. Look at these claw marks." The man sighed and climbed out of his truck. He walked over to my car, examining the damage with a frown. "Well," You certainly got into something, he admitted. But a werewolf? Come on now. Maybe it was a bear. They can do some real damage if they're scared or angry. I shook my head vehemently. It wasn't a bear. I know what I saw. It was... I trailed off, realizing how futile it was. He would never believe me. The man's expression softened a bit. Look, you're obviously shaken up. Why don't I give you a ride into town? We can call the police, get you checked out at the hospital. Part of me wanted to refuse to stay here and gather evidence, but what evidence was there, really? Claw marks that could be explained away as a bear attack, a pool of blood that was probably my own. Okay, I said finally, my shoulders slumping in defeat. Thank you. As I climbed into the man's truck, I cast one last glance at my ruined car. In the bright morning light, it all seemed so mundane. Just a wrecked vehicle on the side of the road. Who would ever believe the truth? The truck started moving, carrying me away from the scene of my nightmarish encounter. As we drove, the man, who introduced himself as Bill, kept glancing at me with a mixture of concern and wariness. So, where you from? He asked, clearly trying to make conversation. Chicago, I replied absently, my mind still back in those woods. Bill nodded. City boy, huh? Not used to the wilderness. You know, we get all sorts of wildlife out here. Coyotes, mountain lions. They can seem pretty scary if you're not used to them. I didn't bother arguing. What was the point? Instead, I just stared out the window, watching the trees go by. Somewhere in those woods, that creature was still out there, waiting, hunting. As we approached the small town in the distance, I realized my ordeal was far from over. How could I possibly explain what had happened? Who would believe me? The memory of those glowing eyes, that monstrous form, was seared into my mind. I knew the truth, even if no one else ever would. And I knew that I would never feel truly safe again, not as long as that thing was out there. The truck pulled into the parking lot of a small hospital. Bill turned to me, his expression a mix of pity and doubt. Well, here we are, he said. You gonna be okay from here? I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As I climbed out of the truck, Bill called after me. Hey kid, try to take it easy on the horror movies for a while, okay? I didn't respond. I just walked toward the hospital entrance, steeling myself for the questions that were to come. How could I possibly make them understand? How could I convince them of the danger that lurked in those woods? As the automatic doors slid open, I took a deep breath. The night of terror was over, but I had a feeling that my struggles were only just beginning. The fluorescent lights of the police station buzzed overhead, their harsh glare making me feel exposed and vulnerable. I sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, my hands trembling slightly as I recounted my harrowing experience to two officers. Their faces remained impassive as I spoke, occasionally exchanging glances that made my stomach churn. So, let me get this straight, Officer Johnson said, leaning back in his chair. You're saying a werewolf attacked your car? I winced at the skepticism in his voice. I know how it sounds, I said, my voice hoarse from exhaustion and fear. But I swear, every word is true. It was massive, with yellow eyes and claws that tore through metal like it was paper. Officer Martinez sighed, tapping her pen against her notepad. Sir, we understand you've been through a traumatic experience, but werewolves? That's a bit far-fetched, don't you think? I know what I saw, I insisted, frustration building in my chest. Look, I have cuts and bruises, my car is totaled. There's blood at the scene. Johnson nodded patronizingly. Yes, and we'll investigate the damage to your vehicle. But let's consider more. Realistic explanations. Perhaps it was a bear. They can cause significant damage when frightened. I shook my head vehemently. It wasn't a bear. It walked on two legs. It was intelligent, almost human-like, but twisted and monstrous. The officers exchanged another look, this one tinged with pity. Martinez leaned forward, her voice softening. Sir, have you been under any unusual stress lately? Or perhaps Are you taking any medications? The implication stung worse than my physical wounds. I'm not crazy, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I know what I saw. Johnson stood up, effectively ending the interview. We'll look into the damage to your vehicle and check the area where you say this incident occurred. In the meantime, I suggest you get some rest. Maybe talk to someone about what you've been through. As I walked out of the interview room, I overheard hushed voices from a nearby desk. Another full moon nutcase, third one this month. My cheeks burned with humiliation. They didn't believe me. Of course they didn't. How could they? If I hadn't lived through it myself, I wouldn't have believed it either. Outside the station, I leaned against the wall, taking deep breaths of the cool evening air. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The beauty of it felt like a mockery after the horrors I'd endured. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone. I needed someone to believe me, someone who knew me well enough to know I wouldn't make this up. I dialed my best friend's number, praying she would understand. Hello? Sarah's voice came through, tinged with concern. Are you okay? I've been trying to reach you all day. Sarah, I said, my voice cracking. Something happened. Something impossible. I poured out my story, the words tumbling out in a frantic rush. I told her about the car breaking down, the monstrous creature, the desperate fight for survival. As I spoke, the silence on the other end of the line grew heavier. When I finished, there was a long pause. That's quite a story, Sarah said finally, her tone careful. Are you sure you're okay? Maybe you should see a doctor. My heart sank. You don't believe me either. It's not that I don't believe you, she said quickly. It's just, werewolves aren't real. You know that, right? Maybe you fell asleep at the wheel and had a really vivid nightmare. It wasn't a dream, I insisted, desperation creeping into my voice. Sarah, please. You know me. You know I wouldn't make this up. Another pause. I know you wouldn't, she said softly. But what you're describing, it's impossible. Maybe the stress of the car breaking down, being alone in the woods at night, it could have played tricks on your mind. I closed my eyes, fighting back tears of frustration. I know what I saw, I repeated, but the words sounded hollow even to my own ears. Look, Sarah said, her voice gentle. Why don't you come stay with me for a few days? We can figure this out together. Maybe talking it through will help make sense of what happened. I wanted to argue, to make her understand the danger that was still out there. But I was tired. So tired. And the thought of facing another night alone was unbearable. Okay, I said finally. I'll come over. As I hung up the phone, a chill ran down my spine. The sun had set completely now, darkness settling over the town. Somewhere out there, in the shadows of the forest, I knew that creature was still lurking. Waiting. No one believed me. No one understood the danger. But I knew the truth. And as I hailed a taxi to take me to Sarah's place, I couldn't shake the feeling that this nightmare was far from over. The werewolf might have disappeared without a trace, but the terror it instilled in me remained. I knew I would never set foot in those woods again. But would that be enough to keep me safe? As the taxi pulled away from the curb, I cast one last glance at the distant tree line, my heart pounding with the knowledge that some monsters were all too real. The steering wheel felt cold beneath my clammy hands as I drove back towards the scene of my nightmare. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to turn around, to flee as far from this cursed place as possible. But I had to know. I had to find proof. As I rounded the bend where my ordeal had begun, my breath caught in my throat. There it was, my car, still sitting abandoned on the side of the road. In the harsh light of day, it looked almost comically out of place, like a crumpled tin can discarded by some careless giant. I parked a safe distance away and stepped out, my legs trembling slightly. The forest loomed before me, no longer the impenetrable wall of darkness it had been that night. but still holding secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to uncover. "You can do this," I muttered to myself, clenching my fist to stop the shaking. "You need answers." As I approached my wrecked vehicle, something glinting in the grass caught my eye. My heart leaped into my throat as I bent down to examine it. The car's missing side mirror lay there, partially hidden by weeds. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. The metal was bent and twisted, with deep scratches marring its surface. "See?" I said aloud, though there was no one to hear me. "This is real. This happened." Emboldened by this small piece of evidence, I moved to the front of the car. My breath quickened as I remembered the deep claw marks that had scored the hood, undeniable proof of the creature's existence. But as I ran my hand over the metal, my heart sank. The gouges were gone, smoothed over as if they had never existed. "No," I whispered, frantically searching every inch of the hood. "No, no, no. They were here. I saw them." But the morning dew had washed away any trace of the attack. The hood was dented and scraped, yes, but nothing that couldn't be explained by a simple car accident. Desperation clawed at my insides as I turned towards the woods. There had to be something. Tracks, fur, anything that could corroborate my story. I plunged into the underbrush, my eyes scanning the ground for any sign of the monster that had pursued me. The forest floor was a mess of fallen leaves and mud. Here and there I spotted animal tracks, the delicate imprints of deer hooves, the familiar paw prints of raccoons or foxes. But nothing large enough, nothing monstrous enough to match the creature I had encountered. "Come on," I muttered, pushing deeper into the woods. "There has to be something." I don't know how long I searched, combing every inch of the forest near where my car had broken down. Time seemed to lose all meaning as I grew increasingly frantic, looking for any shred of evidence that could validate my experience. But there was nothing. No giant paw prints, no tufts of coarse fur caught on branches, nothing but the normal signs of woodland life. Finally, exhausted and defeated, I slumped against a large oak tree. My clothes were dirty and torn from my desperate search, and my mind was reeling. How could there be no trace? How could something so huge, so terrifying, vanish without a trace? Am I going crazy? I asked the silent forest. Did I imagine it all? But even as the doubts crept in, I knew deep in my bones that what I had experienced was real. The terror, the fight for survival. It wasn't something my mind could have conjured up. I closed my eyes, leaning my head back against the rough bark of the tree. The memory of those glowing yellow eyes, the hot breath of the creature as it tried to tear into my car. It was all so vivid, so horrifyingly real. "I know what I saw," I whispered, trying to convince myself as much as anyone else. "I know what happened." But without proof, who would ever believe me? The police had dismissed my story. My best friend thought I was suffering from stress or exhaustion. Even I was starting to question my own sanity. As I sat there, lost in my thoughts, a twig snapped somewhere in the distance. My eyes flew open, my heart rate instantly skyrocketing. For a moment, I was back in that night of terror, certain that at any second, the werewolf would burst through the trees. But the forest remained peaceful. A squirrel scampered up a nearby tree, chattering angrily at my presence. The sun filtered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on the ground. It was just a normal day in the woods. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and every rustle of leaves made me flinch. "This is pointless," I said aloud, pushing myself to my feet. "There's nothing here." As I made my way back to the road, I couldn't help but feel a sense of defeat. I had come here looking for answers, for validation of my experience. Instead, I was leaving with nothing but more questions and a growing sense of unease. My car came into view, still sitting where I had abandoned it that terrible night. I paused, looking at it. In the light of day, it seemed almost comical, just a broken-down vehicle on the side of the road. Who would ever believe the horror it had witnessed? I reached into my pocket, pulling out the bent side mirror I had found earlier. It was the only tangible piece of evidence I had, and even it could be easily explained away as damage from a simple accident. As I stood there, torn between my certainty of what had happened and the complete lack of proof, a chill ran down my spine. I had the sudden, overwhelming feeling that I needed to leave. Now. Without looking back, I hurried to my borrowed car. As I started the engine, I cast one last glance at the forest in my rearview mirror. For a split second, I thought I saw a flash of movement among the trees, something large, something that didn't belong. But when I blinked, it was gone. Just shadows and leaves stirred by the wind. I pulled away, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. As the trees receded behind me, I made a silent vow. I would never return to this place. Whatever had happened here, whatever I had encountered, I wanted no part of it. But even as I drove away, putting distance between myself and the scene of my nightmare, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. The werewolf might have disappeared without a trace, but the memory of it, the terror, the certainty of its existence, that would stay with me forever. And somewhere in those woods I knew it was still out there, waiting, watching. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. But as darkness crept in, my sense of dread grew exponentially. I stood by the window of my small apartment, watching the shadows lengthen across the street below. Every darkened corner, every rustling bush seemed to hide a monstrous shape waiting to pounce. "It's not real," I whispered to myself, trying to calm my racing heart. "You're safe here. It can't get you." But the words rang hollow. I knew what I had seen, what I had experienced. The memory of those glowing eyes, that massive, fur-covered form, was seared into my mind. And now, as night fell once again, the terror came flooding back. I moved away from the window, my hands shaking as I drew the blinds shut. The soft click of the latch seemed absurdly inadequate against the horrors my imagination was conjuring. "Okay," I muttered, running a hand through my hair. Time to secure the perimeter. I went through my apartment methodically, checking every window, every door. I pushed furniture against the entrance, creating a makeshift barricade. It was ridiculous, I knew. If that creature wanted to get in, a bookshelf wouldn't stop it. But the act of doing something, anything, helped keep the panic at bay. As I worked, every creak of the floorboards, every distant siren from the city streets made me jump. My nerves were frayed, my senses on high alert. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, hunted. Finally, with every possible entry point secured, I slumped onto my couch. The silence of the apartment pressed in on me, broken only by the sound of my ragged breathing. "You're okay," I told myself. "You're safe. It's just another night." But it wasn't just another night. It was the second night after my encounter with something that shouldn't exist, something that had nearly killed me. A sudden howl from the street below sent me into a full-blown panic attack. I leapt to my feet, knocking over a lamp in my haste. My heart thundered in my chest as I pressed myself against the wall, eyes darting wildly around the room. "It's here," I gasped, struggling to breathe. "Oh God, it's found me." For a moment I was back in that forest, trapped in my car as that monstrous creature tried to tear its way in. I could almost smell its fetid breath, hear the screech of claws on metal. It took several long, agonizing seconds before reality reasserted itself. The howl had been a dog. Just a normal, everyday dog on the street below. Not a werewolf. Not a monster. I slid down the wall, burying my face in my hands. "Get it together," I muttered. "You can't fall apart like this." But how could I not? How could I ever feel safe again knowing what was out there? Despite my better judgment, I found myself drawn back to the window. With trembling fingers, I parted the blinds just enough to peer out into the night. The street below was quiet, lit by the soft glow of street lamps. A few people walked by, oblivious to the terror that gripped me. And then, for just a moment, I thought I saw something. A flash of movement in the shadows across the street. A pair of glowing eyes staring directly at my window. I jerked back, heart in my throat. "No," I whispered. "No, it can't be here. It can't." I forced myself to look again, but there was nothing there. Just an empty street and the play of shadows from passing cars. You're losing it, I told myself, moving away from the window. It's not here. It can't be here. But the seed of doubt had been planted. What if it had followed me? What if it was out there right now, waiting for its chance to finish what it had started in the forest? Sleep was out of the question. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those razor-sharp teeth, felt the hot breath of the creature on my skin. I relived the terror of the previous night in vivid detail, the sound of metal tearing, the desperate fight for survival, the certainty that each moment would be my last. I paced my apartment, jumping at every creak and groan of the building. The night seemed to stretch on endlessly, each minute an eternity of fear and hypervigilance. This is insane, I muttered as I made my 10th circuit of the living room. You can't live like this. You need to get help. But who would believe me? The police had dismissed my story. My best friend thought I was suffering from stress or exhaustion. Even I was starting to question my own sanity. As the first light of dawn began to seep through the cracks in the blinds, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I had made it through the night. The monster, real or imagined, hadn't come for me. But as I slumped onto the couch, exhausted beyond measure, a chilling thought occurred to me. This was only the beginning. How many more nights would I spend like this, jumping at shadows, reliving the terror? How long before the lack of sleep, the constant fear, drove me truly mad? I looked around my apartment, at the barricaded door and shuttered windows. This wasn't living. This was surviving, and barely at that. I can't do this, I whispered to the empty room. I can't live like this. As the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I made a decision. I couldn't stay here, couldn't keep looking over my shoulder, waiting for the monster to return. I needed answers. I needed help. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone. There had to be someone out there who would believe me, someone who could help me make sense of what had happened. As I scrolled through my contacts, a name caught my eye. Dr. Elena Reyes, a professor of folklore and mythology at the local university. I hesitated, my finger hovering over her number. It was a long shot, I knew. She would probably think I was crazy, just like everyone else. But at this point, what did I have to lose? Taking a deep breath, I pressed the call button. As the phone began to ring, I steeled myself for the conversation ahead. One way or another, I was going to get answers. I had to, because I knew that when night fell again, the terror would return, and I wasn't sure how many more nights like this I could endure before I truly lost my mind. Weeks had passed since that fateful night in the forest, but the terror still clung to me like a second skin. I sat in my living room, the TV droning on in the background, more for the comforting white noise than any real interest in the programming. A sudden crash from outside sent me leaping to my feet, heart pounding. It's just a garbage can, I muttered, peering through the blinds to see a raccoon scurrying away from the toppled bin. Just a damn raccoon. You know, my brother-in-law chimed in, clearly trying to change the subject. There was a story on the news about some strange animal sightings in the state park. Probably just a bear, but it wasn't a bear, I snapped, more harshly than I'd intended. The table fell silent, and I could feel their worried stares boring into me. I mean, never mind. Can we talk about something else? The conversation resumed, stilted and awkward, but I was no longer listening. My mind was back in those woods, reliving the terror of that night. The creature's glowing eyes, its massive form, the sound of its claws tearing into metal. I excused myself early, unable to bear the weight of their concern any longer. Back in the solitude of my apartment, I found myself once again in front of my computer, diving into the depths of werewolf lore. The screen glowed in the darkened room as I scrolled through page after page of myths, legends, and alleged sightings. Silver bullets, full moons, ancient curses. It all seemed so ridiculous in the light of day. And yet I couldn't stop searching, desperate for some shred of explanation for what I'd experienced. This is insane, I muttered, rubbing my tired eyes. You're never going to find answers here. But I couldn't stop. Every night I fell down this rabbit hole, hoping against hope that somewhere in the vast expanse of the internet, I'd find something, anything, that could help me make sense of that night. As the days turned to weeks, I found myself becoming more and more isolated. Friends stopped calling. Invitations dried up. I knew they were tired of my obsession, of the dark cloud that seemed to follow me everywhere. But I couldn't let it go. How could I when the memory of that creature still haunted my every waking moment? The full moon became a source of particular dread. Each month, as that pale orb swelled in the sky, I found myself retreating further into my self-imposed isolation. I'd stock up on supplies, triple-check the locks, and hunker down, waiting for the night to pass. On one such night, I sat huddled on my couch, every light in the apartment blazing. The curtains were drawn tight, but I could still sense the moonlight seeping in around the edges. My skin crawled with the memory of that night, of the creature's hot breath and razor-sharp claws. A knock at the door made me jump, my heart leaping into my throat. "Hey, it's Sarah," came my best friend's muffled voice. "I know you're in there. Please, just talk to me?" I closed my eyes, fighting the urge to respond. I couldn't face her, couldn't bear to see the pity and concern in her eyes. After a few moments, I heard her sigh and walk away. As the night wore on, exhaustion began to overtake fear. My eyelids grew heavy, and despite my best efforts, I felt myself drifting off. Just as sleep was about to claim me, a sound cut through the silence. A long, mournful howl in the distance. My eyes snapped open, every muscle in my body tensing. It could have been a dog or a coyote, or any number of normal, explainable things. But in that moment, all I could think of was the creature from the forest. As I lay there, heart pounding, a chilling realization washed over me. This wasn't over. It would never be over. That night in the woods had changed me irrevocably, leaving me forever looking over my shoulder, forever waiting for the monster to return. The howl faded, leaving behind an oppressive silence. But as I drifted into an uneasy sleep, one thought echoed through my mind. What if it was out there right now? What if, somewhere in the moonlit night, the werewolf was prowling, searching for its next victim? The sudden jolt of consciousness hit me like a bolt of lightning. One moment I was deep in dreamless sleep. The next I was sitting bolt upright in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs as if trying to escape. The darkness of my bedroom pressed in around me, thick and oppressive. Something had woken me, but what? I strained my ears, listening for any sound out of place. The house creaked and settled, but there was nothing unusual in that. No, it wasn't a sound that had disturbed my sleep. It was a feeling, an overwhelming sense that I wasn't alone. My eyes darted around the room, trying to pierce the gloom. The digital clock on my nightstand cast a faint red glow, barely illuminating the familiar shapes of my dresser and closet door. Everything seemed normal, and yet a chill ran down my spine, raising goosebumps along my arms. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. Someone, or something, was watching me. I could feel it. Slowly, reluctantly, I turned my head towards the window. My breath caught in my throat as two glowing eyes met mine, hovering in the darkness beyond the glass. They were unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Wild, feral, and unmistakably inhuman. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I could only stare, transfixed by those terrible eyes that seemed to burn with an inner fire. They held me captive, freezing me in place with a primal fear I'd never experienced before. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, the silhouette around those glowing orbs began to take shape. It was massive, far larger than any animal I'd ever encountered in the Minnesota wilderness. The form was vaguely wolf-like, with a long snout and pointed ears. But there was something horribly wrong about its proportions. It stood on two legs, its shoulders hunched and powerful, arms ending in what looked like enormous clawed hands. My mind reeled, refusing to accept what my eyes were seeing. This couldn't be real. There was no such thing as... The creature shifted slightly, and a shaft of moonlight caught its face. I caught a glimpse of gleaming fangs, and my paralysis broke. I scrambled backwards across the bed, nearly falling off the other side in my panic. A strangled cry escaped my lips as I fumbled for the lamp on my nightstand. Light flooded the room, momentarily blinding me. I blinked rapidly, my gaze snapping back to the window. The creature was still there, but it had retreated slightly from the glass. In the harsh electric light, it looked even more monstrous. A nightmarish fusion of wolf and man, covered in dark fur, its muscles rippling beneath its hide as it moved. "This isn't happening," I whispered, my voice hoarse with terror. "This can't be real." But it was real as the racing of my heart, as real as the cold sweat that drenched my body. I had to do something. I had to protect myself. With shaking hands, I grabbed my phone from the nightstand. Should I call 911? What would I even say? "Hello, there's a werewolf outside my window." They'd think I was crazy or on drugs. No, I had to handle this myself. I slid out of bed, my legs trembling so badly I could barely stand. The creature's eyes followed my every movement, and I fought the urge to look away. Some instinct told me that breaking eye contact would be dangerous, like prey turning its back on a predator. "Stay calm," I muttered to myself. Just lock everything up. It can't get in if everything's locked, right?" I edged towards my bedroom door, never taking my eyes off the window. The beast remained motionless, watching, waiting. My hand found the doorknob and I turned it as quietly as I could, slipping out into the hallway. The rest of the house was dark and silent. I flicked on lights as I went, chasing away the shadows that seemed to harbor untold horrors. My priorities flashed through my mind. Front door, back door, all the windows. I had to secure them all. I practically ran down the stairs, my bare feet slapping against the wood. The front door loomed before me, and I fumbled with the deadbolt, my hand shaking so badly I could barely manage it. The lock clicked into place, and I sagged against the door in momentary relief. But I couldn't stop there. I moved through the house like a man possessed, checking and double-checking every possible entry point. Windows were locked and curtains drawn. The back door was not only locked but barricaded with a chair wedged under the handle. As I worked, I kept expecting to hear glass shattering or wood splintering. The creature had to be trying to get in, didn't it? But the house remained eerily quiet. The only sounds were my ragged breathing and the occasional creak of floorboards beneath my feet. Finally, I had done all I could. Every door was locked, every window secured. I stood in the middle of my living room, arms wrapped around myself, shivering despite the warmth of the house. What now? I couldn't go back upstairs. The thought of returning to that room, of facing that window again, was unbearable. Instead, I sank onto the couch, drawing my knees up to my chest. My phone was still clutched in my hand, and I stared at it, debating whether to call someone. But who would believe me? The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. I kept my eyes fixed on the windows, half expecting to see that monstrous face appear at any moment. But there was nothing, just the darkness of the night beyond the glass. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky, my exhaustion finally overcame my terror. My eyelids grew heavy, and I found myself drifting off despite my best efforts to stay awake. My last conscious thought was a prayer that when I woke up, this would all prove to be nothing more than a vivid nightmare. The sound of birdsong roused me. I blinked groggily, momentarily disoriented to find myself on the couch instead of in bed. Then the memories of the night came rushing back, and I sat up with a gasp. Sunlight streamed through the windows, bathing the room in a warm, golden glow. Everything looked so normal, so ordinary. Had it all been a dream after all? I rose on unsteady legs and made my way to the front window. With trembling hands, I drew back the curtains and peered out. The street was quiet and peaceful. A neighbor walked their dog, waving cheerfully as they passed my house. There was no sign of anything unusual. Feeling slightly emboldened, I unlocked the front door and stepped outside. The morning air was crisp and clean, filled with the scents of grass and flowers. I walked around the house, examining the ground for any signs of the creature's presence. But there were no tracks, no claw marks, nothing to indicate that anything out of the ordinary had occurred. As I completed my circuit of the house, I found myself standing beneath my bedroom window. I looked up, half expecting to see claw marks on the siding or scratches on the glass. But there was nothing. The window was intact, the house undamaged. I sagged against the wall, a wave of relief washing over me. It had been a dream, a terrifyingly vivid nightmare, but nothing more. I laughed shakily, running a hand through my disheveled hair. Get a grip, I told myself. There's no such thing as werewolves. You just watch too many horror movies before bed. But as I turned to go back inside, something caught my eye. There, in the soft earth of the flower bed beneath my window, was a single enormous paw print. My blood ran cold as I stared at it, unable to reconcile its presence with the rational explanations I'd been constructing. No, I whispered, backing away. No, it's not possible. I retreated into the house, locking the door behind me. As I leaned against it, my mind raced. What had I really seen last night? What was out there in the darkness? And most terrifyingly of all, would it come back? The fluorescent lights of the office buzzed overhead as I stared blankly at my computer screen. It was just past 10 a.m., but I felt like I'd been awake for days. The events of last night kept replaying in my mind, each recollection sending a fresh wave of unease through me. I glanced over my shoulder for what must have been the 100th time that morning. The office was bustling with activity, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, co-workers chatting. Everything was normal, and yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. You're being paranoid, I muttered to myself, turning back to my work. But even as I tried to focus on the spreadsheet before me, my eyes kept darting to the windows. The bright Minnesota sun streamed through, casting cheerful patterns on the carpet. It should have been reassuring, but all I could think about were those glowing eyes in the darkness. A sudden burst of laughter from the break room made me jump. My coffee mug teetered precariously on the edge of my desk, and I lunged to catch it before it could fall. As I set it back down with shaking hands, I caught Sarah looking at me with concern from her desk across the aisle. "Hey, you okay?" she asked, her brow furrowed. "You seem really jumpy today." I forced a smile, trying to appear casual. "Yeah, just didn't sleep well last night. You know how it is." Sarah nodded sympathetically, but I could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. "If you say so. Let me know if you need anything, okay?" "Thanks, I will," I replied, already turning back to my computer. I felt bad brushing her off, but how could I possibly explain what was really bothering me? "Oh, by the way, I think I saw a werewolf last night." Yeah, that would go over well. As the morning wore on, I managed to lose myself in work for brief periods. But every time I started to relax, something would bring the memories flooding back. A shadow passing by the window, the sound of a dog barking in the distance. Each little thing set my nerves on edge, leaving me feeling raw and exposed. During my lunch break, I found myself drawn to the TV in the break room. A local news report was playing, and the headline made my blood run cold. "Series of livestock attacks baffles local farmers." I moved closer, my half-eaten sandwich forgotten in my hand. The reporter stood in front of a rural farmhouse, her expression grave. "Over the past week, several farms in the area have reported gruesome attacks on their livestock," she was saying. "Sheep and cattle have been found brutally mauled, with local wildlife experts unable to identify the predator responsible." The camera cut to images that made my stomach churn. Mangled carcasses lay strewn across blood-soaked fields. One shot showed a close-up of deep claw marks raked across a barn door. "Jesus," someone behind me muttered. "What the hell could do something like that?" I didn't respond. Couldn't respond. My mind was racing, connecting dots I desperately wished would remain separate. The attacks had started a week ago. How long had that thing been out there? Watching. Waiting. Hey, Earth to Jason. Sarah's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. I blinked, realizing she'd been trying to get my attention. Seriously, what's going on with you today? You look like you've seen a ghost. For a wild moment, I considered telling her everything. The eyes in the darkness, the monstrous silhouette, the paw print in the flower bed. But the words died in my throat. She'd think I was crazy. Hell, maybe I was crazy. It's nothing, I said instead, tossing my uneaten lunch in the trash. I've got a lot on my mind. Family stuff, you know? Sarah's expression softened. Oh, I'm sorry. Is everything okay? Yeah, it's fine, I lied, hating myself for it. Thanks for asking, though. I appreciate it. The rest of the workday crawled by in a haze of anxiety and false starts. By the time 5 p.m. rolled around, I was exhausted and on edge. As I gathered my things to leave, Sarah stopped by my desk one last time. Hey, take care of yourself, okay? She said, her voice gentle. Whatever's going on, I'm here if you need to talk. I nodded, managing a weak smile. Thanks, Sarah. I'll be fine. See you tomorrow. The drive home should have been a relief, a chance to decompress after a tense day. Instead, every mile ratcheted up my anxiety. The sun was sinking towards the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. It was beautiful, but all I could think about was how quickly night would fall. As I turned onto the winding road that led to my neighborhood, movement in the trees caught my eye. Something large darted between the trunks just at the edge of my vision. My hands clenched the steering wheel, knuckles turning white. It was probably just a deer, I told myself. This area was full of wildlife. There was no reason to think. A dark shape burst from the underbrush, streaking across the road mere yards in front of my car. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching in protest. For a split second, I caught a glimpse of matted fur and gleaming eyes before it vanished into the woods on the other side. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. That was no deer. It was too big, too wrong. With trembling hands, I put the car back in drive and sped the rest of the way home, constantly checking my rearview mirror. As I pulled into my driveway, the last rays of sunlight were fading from the sky. I sat in the car for a long moment, gathering my courage. It's fine, I told myself. You're home. You're safe. Just go inside and lock the door behind you. I got out of the car, my keys clutched tightly in my fist. As I approached the front door, something made me pause. There, in the fading light, I saw them. Deep gouges in the wood, as if something with massive claws had tried to force its way in. My breath caught in my throat as I ran my fingers over the marks. They were fresh, the wood still splintered and raw. This wasn't here this morning. It had come back. It had been here, at my home, in broad daylight. With shaking hands, I unlocked the door and stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind me. I engaged every lock, then sank to the floor, my back against the scarred wood. The soft glow of my laptop screen illuminated the darkened living room as I hunched over it, my eyes burning from hours of intense focus. The clock on the wall ticked past 2 a.m., but sleep was the furthest thing from my mind. My fingers flew across the keyboard, desperately searching for any scrap of information that might explain what I'd seen. Werewolves in Minnesota. I muttered, scrolling through yet another page of results. Most of it was useless. Movie reviews, Halloween costume ideas, cheesy tourist traps. Nothing that could explain the very real, very terrifying creature I'd encountered. I rubbed my eyes, trying to fight off the exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm me. The claw marks on my front door were a constant reminder that this wasn't just some vivid nightmare. Something was out there, something dangerous, and I needed answers. A link caught my eye. Native American Legends of the North Woods. I clicked on it, scanning the text eagerly. As I read, my heart began to race. The Wendigo, I whispered, reading aloud. a malevolent spirit of the forest with an insatiable hunger for human flesh, often described as a tall, emaciated creature with glowing eyes and sharp claws. For a moment, hope flared in my chest. This had to be it, right? But as I read on, my excitement faded. The descriptions didn't quite match what I'd seen. The Wendigo was said to be gaunt, almost skeletal. The creature outside my window had been muscular, powerful, and there was no mention of fur or wolf-like features. Damn it, I growled, slamming the laptop shut in frustration. The sudden darkness made me jump, and I quickly fumbled for the lamp switch. As light flooded the room, I took a shaky breath, trying to calm my racing heart. I glanced at my phone, considering my options. It was late, but I couldn't just sit here doing nothing. With trembling fingers, I dialed the non-emergency number for the local police. After several rings, a tired-sounding voice answered. Minnesota State Police, Officer Jenkins speaking. How can I help you? Hi, I'd like to report some vandalism, I said, wincing at how weak my voice sounded. All right, sir. Can you describe the damage? I took a deep breath. There are claw marks on my front door. Deep ones, like something was trying to get in. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Claw marks? Are you sure it's not just scratches from a branch or something? No, these are definitely claw marks, I insisted. They're fresh and they're big. Too big for any normal animal around here. I could practically hear the skepticism in Officer Jenkins's voice. I see. And did you actually witness this vandalism taking place? Well, no, but... Sir, he cut me off, his tone now tinged with impatience. Without any witnesses or evidence of an actual crime, there's not much we can do. It sounds like you might have had some wildlife causing trouble. I'd suggest contacting animal control if it happens again. But... I started to protest, but the officer was already wrapping up the call. If you notice any other suspicious activity, don't hesitate to call back. Have a good night, sir. The line went dead, leaving me feeling more alone than ever. Of course, they didn't believe me. How could they? I barely believed it myself. I glanced at the window, acutely aware of the darkness pressing in from outside. An idea struck me, born of desperation and too many late-night true crime shows. If no one would believe me, I'd have to get proof myself. I dug through a closet until I found an old digital camera. It wasn't great quality, but it had a decent battery life and could record for hours. With shaking hands, I set it up on a tripod facing the window where I'd first seen the creature. Come on, I muttered, adjusting the angle. If you're real, prove it. As I stepped back to check the camera's view, a floorboard creaked behind me. I whirled around, my heart leaping into my throat. But the room was empty. Just the house settling, I told myself. But the fear that had briefly receded came rushing back full force. I couldn't stay down here. The thought of trying to sleep on the couch, exposed and vulnerable, was unbearable. I grabbed the camera and tripod and retreated to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. Setting up the camera again, this time aimed at my bedroom window, I finally allowed myself to lie down. I didn't bother changing clothes or getting under the covers. Sleep felt impossible, but I had to try. I needed to be alert, to be ready if... when... it came back. Every sound made me flinch. The wind rustling through trees outside, a car passing on the distant highway, the rhythmic ticking of my bedside clock. Each noise sparked a new surge of adrenaline, leaving me wide-eyed and trembling in the darkness. It's not real, I whispered to myself, a mantra repeated over and over. It can't be real. You're just tired and scared and imagining things. But the claw marks on the door were real. The paw print in the flower bed was real. And those eyes, those terrible glowing eyes, they had been all too real. As the hours crept by, exhaustion began to overtake fear. My eyelids grew heavy, my thoughts becoming fuzzy and disjointed. Just as I was about to drift off, a sound jolted me back to full alertness. a low, rumbling growl coming from just outside my window. I lay frozen, hardly daring to breathe. The growl came again, closer this time. Slowly, painfully, I turned my head towards the window. Two glowing eyes stared back at me from the darkness. The camera, I thought wildly. It's recording. It'll see everything. As if reading my thoughts, a massive clawed hand slammed against the glass. The window frame shuddered under the impact. I wanted to scream, to run, to do something. But terror held me paralyzed as those inhuman eyes bored into mine. I could only watch, helpless, as the creature raised its hand for another blow. The glass wouldn't hold. It was coming for me. And as the night erupted into the sound of shattering glass and bestial roars, one thought echoed through my mind. No one will ever believe me. The sound of shattering glass jolted me from my fitful sleep. My eyes snapped open, heart instantly racing as I realized the noise had come from downstairs. It was inside. The thing I'd been dreading, the monster I'd hoped was just a figment of my imagination, had finally broken in. For a moment I lay frozen in my bed, straining my ears. The house had gone deathly quiet. Then a low growl rumbled through the floorboards, followed by the unmistakable sound of claws scraping against hardwood. "Oh God," I whispered, my voice barely audible even to myself. "Oh God, oh God, oh God." Heavy footsteps began to ascend the stairs, each one deliberate and menacing. The old wood creaked under its weight, and I could picture those massive paws leaving gouges in the steps. My mind raced, searching frantically for a way out. The window? No, I was on the second floor. The fall could kill me. Hide in the closet? Pointless. If it could smell me from outside the house, a thin wooden door wouldn't mask my scent. The footsteps reached the landing. A low, guttural snuffling sound came from just outside my bedroom. It was sniffing, tracking me. I was trapped. My eyes darted to the camera I'd set up earlier. It was still recording, its small red light a pinprick of hope in the darkness. If I didn't survive this, at least there would be evidence. Someone would know the truth. The doorknob rattled. I held my breath, praying that the lock would hold. It didn't. With a splintering crack, the door burst inward. Framed in the doorway was a sight that would haunt me for the rest of my life. The werewolf stood on its hind legs, easily 8 feet tall. Matted fur covered its muscular body, and its hands, if you could call them that, ended in wickedly curved claws. But it was the face that struck true terror into my heart. Somewhere between wolf and man, with an elongated snout full of gleaming fangs, and those eyes, those terrible, glowing eyes that had been watching me for nights. For a heartbeat that felt like an eternity, we stared at each other. Then its lips pulled back in a snarl, and it lunged. I rolled to the side purely on instinct, tumbling off the bed as the creature's massive form crashed into the space I'd just occupied. Its claws raked through my mattress like it was tissue paper, sending stuffing flying. "Help!" I screamed, though I knew it was futile. No one would hear me, no one would come. "Somebody help me!" The werewolf's head snapped towards me, its eyes blazing with predatory hunger. It let out a roar that shook the windows, spraying spittle and hot, fetid breath across my face. I scrambled backwards on all fours, my back hitting the wall. The creature advanced, taking its time now, savoring my fear. I could see the muscles rippling beneath its fur, coiled and ready to strike. "Please," I whimpered, though I knew it was useless. This thing wasn't human. It didn't understand please or mercy. It only understood the hunt, the kill. As it drew closer, time seemed to slow. I saw every detail with hyperclarity, the saliva dripping from its fangs, the twitch of its ear as it focused on my racing heartbeat, the flex of its claws as it prepared to strike. In that moment of crystal clarity, survival instinct took over. I lunged to the side towards the window. The werewolf's claws raked across my back, tearing through my shirt and into flesh. Pain exploded across my shoulders, but adrenaline kept me moving. I hit the window with all my weight, praying it would give way. For a terrifying second, it held. Then, with a crash of breaking glass, I was falling. The world spun around me as I tumbled through the air. I had just enough presence of mind to try and roll as I hit the ground. Pain shot through my body as I landed hard on the lawn, knocking the wind out of me. Gasping for air, I looked up to see the werewolf's massive form silhouetted in the shattered window frame. It let out another bone-chilling howl, then leapt down after me. I forced myself to my feet, ignoring the stabbing pain in my ribs and the warm trickle of blood down my back. Pure terror gave me speed I never knew I possessed. I sprinted across the lawn, heading for the tree line at the edge of my property. Behind me, I could hear the heavy thud of the creature's footfalls. It was giving chase, and I knew with sickening certainty that it was faster than me, stronger than me. This wasn't a chase, it was just prolonging the inevitable, but I ran anyway. Branches whipped at my face as I plunged into the forest, my bare feet slipping on the damp leaves. I had no plan, no destination. I just knew I had to keep moving, had to somehow survive this nightmare. The werewolf's growls grew closer. I could hear it crashing through the underbrush behind me, effortlessly navigating the terrain that was slowing me down. Tears streamed down my face, mixing with the blood from dozens of small cuts. This was it. This was how I was going to die. Suddenly, the ground disappeared from beneath my feet. In my blind panic, I'd run right to the edge of a steep ravine. For a split second, I teetered on the brink. Then, with the werewolf's hot breath on the back of my neck, I made a choice. I jumped. The world became a chaotic blur of tumbling limbs and stinging impacts. I rolled and bounced down the steep incline, unable to control my descent. Rocks and branches tore at my skin, each impact threatening to knock me unconscious. Finally, mercifully, I splashed into the icy waters of the creek at the bottom of the ravine. The shock of the cold jolted me back to full awareness. I flailed in the water, my head breaking the surface with a desperate gasp. As I oriented myself, I looked back up the ravine. There, at the top, I could see the werewolf's silhouette. It paced back and forth, letting out frustrated growls. For whatever reason, injury, caution, or simply the challenge of the terrain, it wasn't following me down. I didn't waste the opportunity. Ignoring the protests of my battered body, I began to swim downstream, letting the current carry me away from the monster that had nearly claimed my life. As I rounded a bend in the creek, I lost sight of the creature. But I knew with bone-deep certainty that this wasn't over. It was still out there. And sooner or later, it would come for me again. The forest was a blur of shadows and moonlight as I ran, my lungs burning with each desperate breath. Branches whipped across my face, leaving stinging cuts, but I couldn't slow down. The creature's howl echoed through the trees, sending chills down my spine. It was getting closer. I had no idea where I was going. The familiar trails I'd hiked so many times before were alien in the darkness, transformed into a maze of gnarled roots and low-hanging branches. Every shadow seemed to hide teeth and claws, every rustle of leaves a potential attack. "Keep moving," I gasped to myself, pushing through the pain in my ribs and the burning in my legs. "Don't stop. Don't look back." But even as I urged myself on, I could hear it gaining ground. The heavy thud of its paws on the forest floor, the snap of branches as it tore through the underbrush. It was toying with me now, I realized. It could have caught me at any time. This was just part of the hunt, the thrill of the chase before the kill. Another howl split the night, closer this time. Too close. I veered sharply to the left, ducking under a fallen tree. My foot caught on an exposed root, sending me sprawling. I hit the ground hard, the impact knocking what little air I had left from my lungs. For a moment I lay there, dazed and gasping. "Get up!" a voice in my head screamed. "Get up or you're dead!" I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the fresh wave of pain that washed over me. As I started running again, I caught a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision. A massive, dark shape bounding between the trees. My heart, already racing, somehow found a way to beat even faster. "Help!" I screamed, though I knew it was useless. There was no one out here, no one to save me. "Somebody, please!" My cries were answered by another bone-chilling howl, So close now it seemed to vibrate through my very bones. I pushed myself harder, branches and thorns tearing at my clothes and skin as I crashed through the undergrowth. Suddenly, the trees thinned, and I burst into a moonlit clearing. For a split second, relief washed over me. Open ground, a chance to really run without obstacles. Then I saw where I was, and my blood ran cold. I knew this place. It was an overlook, popular with hikers for its stunning views of the river valley below. But in the silvery moonlight, all I could see was the sheer drop just yards ahead. A dead end. I skidded to a stop at the edge of the cliff, pebbles skittering over the side to fall into the darkness below. Panic clawed at my throat as I realized my mistake. I'd run straight into a trap. Slowly I turned around, my whole body trembling with exhaustion and fear. The tree line seemed to ripple, and then it emerged. The werewolf padded into the clearing, its massive form somehow even more terrifying in the open moonlight. Its fur was matted with leaves and burrs, evidence of our frantic chase through the forest. But its eyes, those glowing, predatory eyes, were fixed solely on me. It growled, low and menacing as it stalked forward. I backed up instinctively, stopping only when my heels met the edge of the cliff. There was nowhere left to run. "Please," I whispered, though I knew it was futile. This thing wasn't human. It didn't understand please or mercy. "Please don't." The werewolf's lips pulled back in a snarl, revealing rows of gleaming fangs. It crouched low, muscles bunching beneath its fur as it prepared to pounce. This was it. This was how I was going to die. Time seemed to slow as the creature lunged. I could see every detail, the flex of its powerful legs, the spread of its clawed hands, the hunger in its terrible eyes. In that moment of crystal clarity, survival instinct took over. I turned and jumped. The world spun around me as I plummeted through the air. Wind rushed past my ears, drowning out even the pounding of my own heart. Above me, I heard the werewolf's enraged roar, quickly fading as I fell. The impact with the water hit me like a truck. Cold enveloped me, shocking the air from my lungs. For a terrifying moment, I didn't know which way was up. Then my survival instincts kicked in again, and I clawed my way to the surface. I broke through with a desperate gasp, flailing in the swift current. The river was higher than usual, swollen with recent rains. It swept me along, tumbling me over and over. I caught glimpses of the moonlit cliffs above, heard the distant roar of the werewolf, but it was all I could do to keep my head above water. "Help!" I tried to shout, but the word came out as a strangled gasp. Water filled my mouth, cutting off my cry. I coughed and sputtered, fighting to stay afloat. The river carried me around a bend, and suddenly the werewolf's howls were cut off. But I had no time to feel relief. Ahead, I could hear a new sound, the thunderous roar of rushing water. Rapids. No, 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 I moaned, trying desperately to swim for the shore. But the current was too strong, pulling me inexorably towards the chaos ahead. The world became a blur of white water and jagged rocks. I was tossed about like a rag doll, each impact threatening to knock me unconscious. Water filled my nose and mouth. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. There was only the primal, desperate need to survive. Just when I thought I couldn't hold on any longer, the river spat me out into calmer waters. I broke the surface with a ragged gasp, coughing and retching. My arms and legs felt like lead as I weakly paddled towards the shore. Finally, my feet touched the muddy bottom. I dragged myself onto the riverbank, collapsing onto the wet sand. For long moments, I just lay there, shaking and gasping, unable to believe I was still alive. Slowly, painfully, I pushed myself up to sitting. My whole body ached, and I could feel warm trickles of blood from dozens of cuts and scrapes. But I was alive. Somehow, impossibly, I had survived. I looked back the way I had come. The cliffs loomed in the distance, dark and foreboding. There was no sign of the werewolf, no howls carried on the wind. But I knew, with bone-deep certainty, that it was still out there. This wasn't over. I had escaped for now, but the nightmare was far from finished. As the adrenaline began to fade, leaving me cold and trembling on the riverbank, one thought echoed through my mind. I had to get help. But who would ever believe me? The first rays of dawn were just beginning to paint the sky when I finally managed to drag myself fully out of the river. My clothes were torn and sodden, clinging to my battered body like a second skin. Every movement sent waves of pain through me, but the bone-deep chill of the water motivated me to keep moving. I stumbled up the muddy bank, my legs trembling with exhaustion. The events of the night played on repeat in my mind. The crash of breaking glass, those terrible glowing eyes, the desperate flight through the forest. It all seemed like a nightmare, but the very real pain and the blood trickling from countless cuts told me otherwise. Got to get help, I mumbled through chattering teeth. I oriented myself as best I could, trying to remember the geography of the area. There was a road that ran parallel to the river, maybe a mile or so from where I was. If I could just reach it, flag down a car. The journey was agonizing. Every step was a battle against pain and fatigue. Branches caught at my clothes, thorns raked across my already abused skin. But the memory of those fangs, those claws, kept me moving. I couldn't stay out here. It might still be hunting me. After what felt like hours, I finally heard the blessed sound of traffic. I quickened my pace, ignoring the protests of my battered body. As I broke through the tree line, I saw the road stretching out before me. A wave of relief washed over me, quickly followed by a surge of panic. What if no one stopped? What if they thought I was some crazed drug addict and just drove on by? I didn't have long to worry. A car appeared around the bend, and I stumbled out onto the shoulder, waving my arms frantically. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice hoarse and ragged. "Stop! Please, I need help!" The car slowed, then pulled over. An older man leaned out the window, his eyes widening as he took in my bedraggled appearance. "Good Lord, son," he exclaimed. "What happened to you?" I opened my mouth to explain, then hesitated. How could I possibly tell him the truth? I was attacked, I managed. "In the woods. Please, I need to get to a hospital." The man didn't hesitate. He jumped out of the car and helped me into the passenger seat. As we drove, he peppered me with questions, but I could only give vague answers. How could I explain what had really happened? The emergency room was a blur of activity. Nurses swarmed around me, cutting away my ruined clothes and cataloging my injuries. The doctor, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, looked at me with concern as she examined the deep gashes on my back. "These look like animal claw marks," she said, her brow furrowed. "Can you tell me what happened?" I swallowed hard, knowing how crazy I was about to sound. It was a wolf," I said. "But not a normal wolf. It was huge, and it walked on two legs. Like a werewolf." The doctor's expression changed subtly. Concern was replaced with something else. Skepticism, maybe even pity. "I see," she said carefully. "Well, let's focus on getting you patched up for now. We'll need to clean these wounds thoroughly to prevent infection." As they worked on me, I overheard snippets of conversation. Words like delirious and possible head trauma were thrown around. I wanted to protest, to make them understand. But exhaustion was overtaking me. As they pushed something into my IV, the world began to fade away. I woke sometime later to find a police officer standing by my bed. He introduced himself as Detective Johnson and asked if I felt up to answering some questions. I nodded, trying to shake off the fog of pain medication. "Can you tell me what happened to you?" he asked, pen poised over his notebook. I took a deep breath and told him everything. The eyes at my window, the attack at my house, the chase through the forest. With each word, I could see the disbelief growing in his eyes. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. "Mr. Thompson," he said finally, his tone carefully neutral. "That's quite a story. But I have to ask, is it possible that your memory of events might be confused? You've been through a traumatic experience, and with the medications you're on." "No," I said firmly, fighting back tears of frustration. I know what I saw. It was real. It was there. Detective Johnson sighed. Look, we found some evidence of forced entry at your house. Broken glass, claw marks on the door, but everything points to a large animal attack, probably a bear. There's no such thing as werewolves, son. I wanted to argue, to make him understand, but I could see in his eyes that it was pointless. He'd already made up his mind. The rest of the day passed in a haze of medical tests and police questions. They took photos of my injuries, collected my ruined clothes as evidence, but I could tell that no one believed my story. They all looked at me with that same mixture of pity and skepticism. As evening approached, the doctor returned to my room. "Well, Mr. Thompson," she said, reviewing my chart, "your injuries, while extensive, aren't severe enough to warrant keeping you overnight. We've cleaned and stitched the worst of the lacerations and given you antibiotics to prevent infection. Do you have someone who can pick you up and stay with you tonight?" I shook my head. My parents lived out of state, and I didn't want to worry them with this. My friends. How could I possibly explain this to them? "I'll be fine on my own," I lied. The doctor looked concerned but didn't argue. She gave me care instructions and prescriptions for pain medication and antibiotics. As a nurse helped me change into some donated clothes, reality began to sink in. I was going home, back to the house where it had all started, and I would be alone. As I stepped out of the hospital into the gathering twilight, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool evening air. Somewhere out there, that thing was still lurking, waiting, and no one believed me. I hailed a taxi, giving the driver my address with a sense of dread. As we drove through the darkening streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was heading right back into the monster's lair. And this time, there would be no one to hear me scream. The taxi pulled up to my house, and I felt a chill run down my spine. It looked so normal, so peaceful in the fading evening light. But I knew the horrors that had unfolded here just hours ago. "You sure you're okay, buddy?" the driver asked, eyeing me in the rearview mirror. "You look like you've seen a ghost." If only he knew. "I'm fine," I lied, handing over the fare. "Thanks for the ride." As I stepped out of the cab, I noticed something odd. The front door, which had been splintered by the werewolf's attack, was now pristine. A fresh coat of paint gleamed in the porch light. "What the hell?" I muttered, approaching cautiously. A note was taped to the door. "Heard about the break-in. We fixed up the door for you. Hope you're okay. The Millers." The Millers. My well-meaning but nosy neighbors. Any other time I might have appreciated the gesture. Now it felt like a punch to the gut. They'd unwittingly destroyed potential evidence. I unlocked the door with trembling hands and stepped inside. The house was quiet. Eerily so. No sign of the chaos from last night. Someone, the police maybe, had cleaned up the broken glass and straightened the furniture. "Hello?" I called out, though I knew no one would answer. Part of me was terrified the werewolf might still be lurking, waiting to finish what it started. I made my way upstairs, wincing with each step. My body was a mass of aches and pains, the hospital's painkillers wearing off. I needed to find my camera. If I could just show people the footage, they'd have to believe me. My bedroom was a mess, the struggle from last night evident in the torn bedding and scattered belongings. But as I searched frantically, my heart sank. The camera was gone. "No, no, no," I muttered, tearing apart drawers and looking under furniture. "It has to be here." Finally, I found it, or what was left of it. The camera lay in pieces under the bed, its memory card crushed beyond repair. Whether it was destroyed in the struggle or deliberately smashed, I couldn't tell. But my proof was gone. I sank to the floor, fighting back tears of frustration. "Why?" I whispered to the empty room. "Why is this happening to me?" As if in answer, a floorboard creaked downstairs. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Was it back? "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. "Is someone there?" Silence. Then another creak. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the pain that shot through my body. I had to get out, had to find a safe place. But as I reached the top of the stairs, I saw a figure in the hallway below. Jesus, kid, you scared me half to death. It was Mr. Miller, my neighbor. He was holding a casserole dish and looking up at me with concern. Sorry to barge in, he said, but we were worried when you didn't answer the door. Thought you might need some dinner after. Well, whatever happened? I felt a mix of relief and irritation. Thanks, I managed. I just got home from the hospital. Mr. Miller's eyes widened. Hospital? Good Lord, what happened? The police wouldn't tell us anything. I opened my mouth, then closed it. How could I possibly explain? It was an animal attack, I said finally. It wasn't entirely a lie. An animal? In the house? Mr. Miller looked skeptical. What kind of animal? I'm not sure, I lied. It was dark. Look, I appreciate the food, but I'm really tired. I just need to rest. Mr. Miller nodded, setting the casserole on the hall table. Of course. You get some sleep. And don't you worry about a thing, the whole neighborhood's keeping an eye out. Whatever broke in won't be coming back. If only he knew. After Mr. Miller left, I double-checked all the locks. Then, on a hunch, I went to search for my torn and bloodied clothes from the night before. They were gone. Had the police taken them as evidence? Or had something more sinister happened? I spent the next few hours scouring news sites on my phone, looking for any reports of the attack. But there was nothing. No mentions of unusual animal sightings. No reports of a disturbance in the woods. It was as if the whole terrifying ordeal had never happened. As night fell, panic began to set in. What if it came back? The repaired door wouldn't stop it. The windows were just glass. I was trapped in a house of cardboard, waiting for the big bad wolf to huff and puff and blow it all down. In desperation, I grabbed some supplies, water, snacks, my phone charger, and barricaded myself in the bathroom. It was the only room without windows, the only place I might be safe. I sat on the cold tile floor, back pressed against the door, and waited. Every creak of the house, every rustle of wind outside sent my heart racing. I knew I couldn't stay in here forever. But for tonight, it was my fortress against the impossible horror that lurked in the darkness. As exhaustion began to overtake me, one thought kept running through my mind. When the sun rose, what would I do? How could I fight something no one believed existed? I closed my eyes, praying for a dreamless sleep. Tomorrow, I'd have to find a way to prove the truth. Before it was too late. The morning light filtering through the bathroom window did nothing to ease my fears. I'd spent the night huddled against the door, every creak and groan of the house sending jolts of panic through my battered body. As I uncurled myself from the floor, wincing at my stiff muscles, I knew I couldn't go on like this. I needed someone to believe me. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone. Mike, my best friend since childhood, would understand. He had to. The phone rang 3 times before Mike's groggy voice answered. Hello? Mike, it's me. I need your help. Something happened last night. I poured out the whole story. The eyes at the window, the attack, the chase through the forest. As I spoke, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush, I could almost feel Mike's skepticism growing. Whoa, slow down, he interrupted. Are you saying a werewolf attacked you, like an actual werewolf? I know how it sounds, I pleaded. But it's true. I swear to God, Mike, it was real. There was a long pause. When Mike spoke again, his voice was gentle, careful. Listen, buddy, you've been through a lot. Maybe you should talk to someone. A professional, I mean. I'm not crazy, I snapped, immediately regretting my outburst. I'm sorry. I need you to believe me. I believe that you believe it, Mike said slowly. But werewolves? Come on. You know that's not possible. We went back and forth for a while, but it was clear Mike thought I was having some kind of breakdown. By the time I hung up, I felt even more alone than before. My phone buzzed with a text. It was my mom. Honey, we're worried about you. Please call us. I hesitated, then dialed. Maybe my parents would understand. They didn't. Sweetie, we think you should see Dr. Harriman, my mom said, referring to our family therapist. She can help you work through this experience. It's not in my head, I insisted. It really happened. Of course, dear, my mom soothed, but I could hear the doubt in her voice. Just promise us you'll make an appointment? I agreed, if only to end the conversation. As I hung up, frustration and despair washed over me. How could I make them understand when I barely understood it myself? Desperate for some kind of validation, I decided to try the local newspaper. Surely they'd be interested in a story like this. The Oakville Gazette office was a small, cluttered space that smelled of old coffee and ink. The editor, a grizzled man named Frank, looked up as I entered. "Can I help you?" he asked, eyeing me warily. I took a deep breath. "I have a story for you, about a werewolf attack in town." Frank's eyebrows shot up. "A werewolf attack? Son, April Fool's was last month." "It's not a joke," I insisted, my voice rising. "It happened to me last night. I can show you the claw marks." Frank held up a hand, cutting me off. "Look, kid, we're a respectable paper. We don't print hoaxes or fairy tales. If you want to submit a piece for the creative writing section, fine. But don't try to pass it off as news." I left the office feeling defeated, ignoring the chuckles I heard behind me. As I walked down the street, I could feel eyes on me. People were staring, whispering. News travels fast in a small town, and clearly word of my delusions had spread. In a last-ditch effort, I headed to the library. Maybe there was some historical precedent, some local legend that could lend credence to my story. The librarian, Mrs. Patel, gave me an odd look as I requested books on local folklore and unexplained phenomena. "School project?" she asked. "Something like that," I muttered, not meeting her eyes. For hours I pored over dusty tomes and microfiche records. There were plenty of stories. Mysterious lights in the forest, unexplained livestock deaths, even a few alleged beast sightings, but nothing concrete, nothing that definitively pointed to the existence of werewolves. As closing time approached, Mrs. Patel tapped me on the shoulder. "Find what you were looking for?" I shook my head, closing the book I'd been reading. "Not really." She hesitated, then leaned in close. "You know, my grandmother used to tell stories about the old country, creatures that walked like men but weren't men. I always thought they were just tales to scare children, but..." She trailed off, shaking her head. "Never mind, it's silly." I perked up. "No, please, what did she say?" But Mrs. Patel had already retreated, her professional demeanor back in place. "I'm sorry, we're closing now. You'll have to continue your research another day." Frustrated and no closer to answers, I trudged home as the sun began to set. As I walked down my street, I noticed my neighbors outside, tending to yards or chatting. But as soon as they saw me, conversation stopped. They watched me warily, some even hurrying inside. I caught snippets of whispered conversations. "Animal attack," that's what I heard. Talking about werewolves, can you believe it? "Maybe we should call someone. He seems unstable." I quickened my pace, keeping my head down. The weight of their disbelief, their judgment, was almost unbearable. As I reached my front door, I heard a voice call out, "Hey, you okay?" It was Mr. Miller, my well-meaning neighbor. He was trying to sound casual, but I could see the concern and fear in his eyes. "I'm fine," I said shortly, fumbling with my keys. "Listen, if you need anything..." he started, but I cut him off. "I said I'm fine," I snapped, immediately regretting my tone. But I couldn't deal with more disbelief, more pitying looks. I slammed the door behind me, leaning against it as tears of frustration welled up. Nobody believed me. I had no proof, no allies, nothing but my own traumatic memories. As the last light of day faded, I felt the familiar tendrils of panic creeping in. Night was falling, and somewhere out there I knew The creature was waiting. I was alone. Alone with a truth no one would accept, facing a threat no one would acknowledge. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in ominous shades of red and purple. I paced my living room, every muscle tense, every sense on high alert. The rational part of my brain kept insisting that I was safe, that the locks and alarms would keep any intruder out. But I knew better. I'd seen what that creature could do. I checked my phone for the 100th time. No messages, no missed calls. Everyone I knew thought I was either lying or losing my mind. I was truly alone. As the last light faded from the sky, I heard it, a long, mournful howl in the distance. My blood ran cold. It was back. No, 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 I whispered, my hands shaking as I double-checked the locks on the windows. This can't be happening again. The howl came again, closer this time. It was moving fast, faster than any natural animal could. I ran to the kitchen, grabbing the biggest knife I could find, for all the good it would do against those claws, those teeth. Suddenly the lights flickered and died. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft whir of the air conditioning, all fell silent. I was plunged into darkness. Shit, I hissed, fumbling for my phone. As the screen lit up, casting an eerie blue glow around the room, I heard a heavy thud from above. Something had landed on the roof. My heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe, I backed away from the windows. Slow, deliberate footsteps moved across the roof, each one punctuated by the scrape of claws against shingles. It was toying with me. It knew I was here, trapped like a rat in a cage. I had to hide. The bathroom was too obvious. It's where I'd hidden last time. The basement? No. I'd be cornered. My gaze fell on the hallway closet. It wasn't ideal, but it was the best option I had. As quietly as I could, I made my way to the closet, slipping inside and pulling the door closed behind me. I wedged myself between winter coats and boxes of old shoes, trying to make myself as small as possible. For a moment, all was quiet. Had it left? Had this all been some cruel trick of my imagination? Then I heard it, the sound of breaking glass from upstairs, followed by the thud of something heavy landing on the floor. It was inside. I clapped a hand over my mouth to stifle a whimper, tears streaming down my face. This couldn't be happening. Not again. The creature moved through the house with agonizing slowness. I could hear it sniffing, searching. Furniture scraped across floors as it shoved things aside. It was hunting me. A low growl rumbled through the house so deep I could feel it in my bones. It was close now, just on the other side of the closet door. I held my breath, praying to whatever God might be listening. Please, let it pass by. Please let this all be a nightmare. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then, with a splintering crack, the closet door was ripped away. I found myself staring into those terrible, glowing eyes once more. The werewolf's hot, fetid breath washed over me as it snarled, lips pulling back to reveal rows of gleaming fangs. Time seemed to slow. I saw every detail with horrifying clarity. The saliva dripping from its jaws, the coiled muscles beneath matted fur, the wicked curve of its claws as it reached for me. In that moment of paralyzing terror, a crazy idea flashed through my mind. It was stupid, probably suicidal, but it was all I had. With a scream that was equal parts fear and defiance, I raised my phone and activated the flashlight function. The sudden burst of bright light hit the werewolf square in the eyes. The creature reared back with a roar of pain and surprise. It was all the opening I needed. I bolted, ducking under its massive arm and sprinting for the front door. Behind me, I heard the crash of the coat rack being knocked over, followed by the thunderous impacts of the werewolf's footfalls. My hands shook as I fumbled with the locks, acutely aware of the monster bearing down on me. Just as I felt hot breath on the back of my neck, the door swung open. I threw myself outside, nearly falling down the porch steps in my haste. The cool night air hit me like a slap to the face, shocking me into even greater speed. Where could I go? The woods were out of the question. That was its territory. My car? No, I'd never get it started in time. My neighbors? As if in answer to my unspoken question, I saw a light come on in the Miller's house across the street. Without hesitation, I sprinted towards it. "Help!" I screamed, my voice raw with terror. "Somebody help me!" Behind me, I heard the werewolf burst through my front door, wood splintering under its massive strength. Its snarls filled the night air, spurring me to run faster than I ever had in my life. I reached the Miller's porch, pounding on the door with all my might. "Please, let me in, it's coming!" The door opened, revealing Mr. Miller's startled face. "What in God's name?" I didn't wait for him to finish. I shoved past him, slamming the door shut and throwing the deadbolt. "Call the police," I gasped, struggling to catch my breath. "It's here. It's real. You have to believe me." Mr. Miller stared at me, confusion and fear warring on his face. "What's here? What are you talking about?" Before I could answer, an earth-shaking roar split the night. Mr. Miller's eyes widened in shock. "What? What was that?" he whispered. I turned to the window, dreading what I might see. There, illuminated by the porch light, stood the werewolf. Its massive form filled the frame, claws flexing as it stared at us with hungry, inhuman eyes. For the first time, someone else was seeing it. Someone else would know the truth. As Mr. Miller's wife screamed and their dog began to bark frantically, I allowed myself a moment of grim satisfaction. They believed me now, but as the werewolf's lips pulled back in a snarl, I realized that belief might have come too late. We were trapped, and the night was far from over. The creature took a step towards the house, the wooden porch creaking under its weight. This was it. The final confrontation was about to begin. The harsh glare of sunlight pierced through my eyelids, dragging me back to consciousness. My head throbbed, and every muscle in my body screamed in protest as I tried to move. Slowly, I blinked my eyes open, confusion washing over me as I took in my surroundings. I was in my car, slumped awkwardly in the driver's seat. Through the windshield, I could see an unfamiliar rest stop, a small building surrounded by picnic tables and towering pines. How had I gotten here? Panic gripped me as I realized I had no memory of leaving the Miller's house, let alone driving to wherever this was. The last thing I remembered was the werewolf advancing on the porch, its massive form silhouetted in the doorway. "What the hell happened?" I muttered, wincing at the sound of my own voice. I fumbled for my phone, finding it wedged between the seat and center console. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. According to the GPS, I was nearly 100 miles from home. As I shifted to sit up straighter, pain lanced through my body. Looking down, I saw my clothes were torn and stained with dirt and blood. Fresh cuts and bruises covered my arms, and I could feel more beneath my shirt. "No, no, no," I whispered, the reality of the situation sinking in. It was real. It had to be real. But if it was real, how had I escaped? Why couldn't I remember? With trembling hands, I started the car. Whatever had happened, I couldn't stay here. I had to get back, had to find out the truth. The drive home was a blur of anxiety and confusion. Every shadow on the road seemed to hide glowing eyes, every rustle in the trees a potential threat. By the time I reached the outskirts of town, my knuckles were white on the steering wheel. As I turned onto my street, I braced myself for, what? Police tape? News vans? Some sign of the chaos that had unfolded last night? But there was nothing. Houses stood quiet and undisturbed. Mrs. Johnson was watering her roses. The paperboy tossed the morning edition onto porches with practiced ease. It was as if nothing had happened. I pulled into my driveway, staring in disbelief at my house. The front door, which I distinctly remembered the werewolf smashing through, was intact. The porch bore no claw marks, no sign of the creature's massive weight. In a daze, I got out of the car and approached the Miller's house. Mr. Miller was outside mowing his lawn. He looked up as I approached, his expression wary. "Mr. Miller," I called out, my voice cracking. "Last night, what happened?" He frowned, shutting off the mower. "What do you mean, what happened? Are you feeling all right, son? You look like hell." I gaped at him. The thing. The werewolf. It was here, on your porch. You saw it." Mr. Miller's frown deepened. "Werewolf? What are you talking about? Look, I know you've been going through some things, but this isn't funny. Maybe you should go lie down." I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it. What was the point? He clearly had no memory of last night's events. Or worse, it had never happened at all. In a last, desperate attempt to make sense of things, I headed to the police station. Surely they would have some record, some evidence of what had transpired. The station was quiet when I entered, just a bored-looking deputy at the front desk. He looked up as I approached, his eyes widening slightly at my disheveled appearance. "Can I help you?" he asked cautiously. "I need to speak with the chief," I said. "It's urgent. It's about the attacks." The deputy raised an eyebrow but picked up the phone. A few moments later, Chief Bradshaw emerged from his office. "All right, son," he said, his tone a mixture of concern and exasperation. "What's this about?" I took a deep breath and launched into my story. The initial sightings, the attack at my house, the chase through the forest. With each word, I could see the disbelief growing in the chief's eyes. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed, rubbing his temples. "Look," he said, his voice stern. "I don't know what's going on with you. Maybe you're on something. Maybe you need help. But I'm going to say this once and only once. We take false reports very seriously in this town. If you come in here again with this fantasy, there will be consequences. Do you understand me?" I felt the fight drain out of me. "Yes, sir," I mumbled. "Good," he nodded. "Now go home and get some rest. And maybe talk to someone, yeah?" I left the station feeling numb. No one believed me. There was no evidence, no corroboration. Had I imagined it all? Was I truly losing my mind? As I walked home, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the street. A chill ran down my spine as I passed the edge of the forest that bordered the town. Something made me stop, made me turn to look into the gathering darkness beneath the trees. For a moment, all was still. Then I saw them. 2 pinpricks of light glowing in the shadows. Eyes. Inhuman eyes. Watching me with predatory intent. My breath caught in my throat. It was real. It was all real. But as quickly as they appeared, the eyes vanished. I was left staring into empty woods, my heart pounding. I hurried home, locking the door behind me. As I leaned against it, catching my breath, a grim realization settled over me. It was out there. Real, dangerous, and hunting. And I was the only one who knew the truth. As night fell, I began my now familiar routine of checking locks and drawing curtains. But this time it was different. This time I knew with absolute certainty that I wasn't safe. The werewolf was out there.